Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing my March and April wrap up, and I'll also mention a few of the books that I may or may not read in May. I completely forgot to do my March wrap up, so I thought I would just wait until this month was over and combine them. So without further ado, let's jump into what I read in the month of March. So in the month of March, I read 7 books. Wow, it's a lot more than I thought I would have read, but I'll take it. So the first book that I read was Empire of the Damned by J. Christoph. I do have a review on this, both a non-spoiler one and a spoiler one. And it was great to be back in the world, but overall that book really fell flat for me. Really suffered from middle picture syndrome, and I'm a little bit nervous about the direction that the series is going in. I ended up giving the book 2.75/3 stars. Next, we had a Japanese translated fiction, and that was Out by Natsuo Kirino. I do have a review of this as well, and it is an absolutely fantastic book that is really about the place of women in society, but also the place of men in society, and how societal expectations and cultural norms can often get in the way of one's own desires. And I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. It's very, very dark, not one I would recommend to most people, but overall it was a very enjoyable read. I gave it 5 stars, absolutely phenomenal, still think about it, and I can't wait to read more Kirino as a result. Next up, we have another Japanese translated fiction. This was a really quick read, and that was How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. And this is a book that inspired the new Studio Ghibli film called The Heron and the Boy, I think it is, which is partially based on Hayao Miyazaki's life, but also is partially based on this book. It really explores ethics, and it really explores the kind of childlike wonder that we all have when we're young, but we tend to lose as we get older. And it's just absolutely amazing. It's one of those books that will make you think about what's happening in the world around us, but also about your place in that. And it is just an absolute dream to read. Next up, we have another Japanese translated fiction book. I didn't actually realise that I read 3 Japanese translated fiction books in very quick succession, and that was The Nakano Thrift Shop by Hiromi Kawakami. And this is a really short book. It's just one of those books that just kind of transports you to Tokyo, and you're in this little thrift shop, and you're basically following kind of a bunch of different characters as they go about their lives in this thrift shop. It's so beautiful, it's so poignant, and it's just very like heartwarming to read, because it's really just about human relationships and how we all impact each other in one way or another. And it's just really beautiful. Strongly recommend it if you want like a quick read. I gave The Nakano Thrift Shop 3.75 stars, mainly just because, you know, it's poignant, but it's quite short as well. I would have liked to have been a bit longer. I would have liked to have been there a little bit more of a plot, potentially, but you know what, I liked it for what it was. It wasn't life-changing, but I think it was a really great break from the heavier stuff that I've been reading before. Next up, we have The Trials of Empire, which is the 3rd book in the Empire of the Wolves trilogy by Richard Swan. This was not good. My patrons and I read this together. We'd been reading 1 book a month in that trilogy, and it really, really did not deliver for all of us. I do have a series review coming out in the coming weeks, so keep an eye on that, but all I'm going to say is not good. 2 stars. Really, 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 really not good. Then we have 2 more books for March. The next one we have is, without a doubt, one of my favourite sci-fi books of all time, and that is China Mountain Zhang by Maureen McHugh. Oh, this book was amazing. It was so good. I have a review coming out soon. It's probably gonna be out maybe the week after this video goes out, but it was just amazing. It's really kind of written in a quite a unique way. It's almost written like a collection of short stories, but our main character Zhang is he kind of pops up in each of the other characters' kind of little mini stories, but then we have overarching story that relates to Zhang specifically. It's also set in an alternate reality where the US has been colonized by communist China, and so we're seeing America through a very, very different lens, especially New York, and I just thought that was such a cool spin on it. Absolutely fantastic, all about kind of personal identity, all about kind of figuring out what is your place in the world that you live in, and it's just absolutely phenomenal. Such a breath of fresh air. And it's funny that I say that because it was written in the 90s, and yet it's aged so well. And it's probably not going to be a surprise to anybody that I gave this a 5 stars. Next up, we have The Will of the Many, which is the first book in the Hierarchy series by James Islington. I had very kind of mixed emotions going into this book, given how hyped it is. And I've talked about this many times before. I've had very mixed experiences when it comes to hyped fantasy and sci-fi series on BookTube. But thankfully, this is one of those very rare occasions where I didn't hate it. And I actually really enjoyed it. I loved everything about it. Keep an eye out for my more detailed thoughts on this book because I just had a really fun time. Like, I was completely taken in by it. I read it a lot quicker than I thought I would, considering it's a very chunky book, but it was just really, really fun. I gave it a full 0.5 stars. Very, very solid start to the series. Then we're going to go into April. In April, I read 6 books. Again, more than I thought I would. Okay. So the first book is The Just City by Jo Walton. This is the first book. I think it's called the Thessaly trilogy, and it was great. And the reason why it's great is because it's based on The Republic by Plato, which is my favourite philosophical work. Maybe aside from Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, I think that probably takes the edge just by a small amount. But the point is that The Republic is one of my favourite philosophical works of all time. I've read it many times. I try to read it at least once a year because it poses some really interesting questions. And I think especially when you relate that to a modern context, it poses some even more interesting questions. So when I found out through Matt, one of my Patreons, about this series, I was just absolutely kind of enraptured by the concept, and he kindly purchased me the first book. We ended up buddy reading it together, and it was just absolutely fantastic. And we're basically following a world where a bunch of characters are trying to implement the Republic to a bunch of orphan children. And you see a lot of the kind of ups and downs that they go through. You also kind of see them tweak things away from what Plato's original vision was. But to be fair, it kind of makes sense. It's basically just a thought experiment playing out in real time, and it's really, really fun to read. As always with a book like this, it's going to pose some really interesting philosophical questions as well. And I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I will probably be doing a dedicated review for this at some point. I might read the second book as well before I do that, but watch this space for that. But I think if this even remotely interests you, you should go check it out. I gave it 4 stars. It was really solid, and I'm really excited to see where it goes next. Then we have The Dead Zone by Stephen King, and this book I was really looking forward to because a friend of mine whose opinion I really rate loves this book. I think it's his favourite Stephen King, so when he told me about it, I thought, okay, I've got to read his favourite Stephen King book. And I liked it. I wouldn't say it was my favourite. I don't think it's quite reached Misery levels for me. Like, Misery is my favourite Stephen King book so far. Actually, I also love The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon as well. Both are absolutely fantastic. And this was also good. It just dragged quite a lot. I really liked the first half, but the direction of the second half, I just wasn't that engaged, if I'm being completely honest. It kind of dragged a little bit, and I didn't really like the thriller elements. I just kind of want it to be kind of much more sci-fi. So I gave it a 3.75 stars. Watch this space for my much more detailed review. Then we have Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the first book in the Founders trilogy, and this was a massive disappointment for me. I really enjoyed the first 2/3 of the book. The final part of the book was just so ridiculous and so kind of completely mismatched with the first 2/3 of the book. It felt like I was almost reading another series. And it's such a shame because I was really enjoying it up until that kind of last chunk of the book. I gave it a 3.5 stars, so that's not to say that it's bad, because it's not bad, but I think compared to what it could have been with a bit more thought and maybe even a slightly longer book, I think it could have been a 5-star quite easily. I've actually decided to stop reading this series, and I'm not going to continue on with it. I will read Robert Jackson Bennett's 2 other series, one of which is completed, and then one of which is just the first book has come out this year or last year, I think it was. So I will definitely give those a go because I do really like the way he writes. And I have to say, I did love the magic in this book. I love sentient objects. It's one of my favourite tropes. And I really like the idea of imbuing objects with power. I love it. So I really love that. It was just kind of the ending. It really soured it for me. And Very disappointing, I think. Probably one of the biggest disappointments for me this year. Again, not necessarily a bad book, but it was a disappointment for me for sure. Next up, we have Clara and the Sun by Katsuo Ishiguro. This is my first Ishiguro book that I've read, and I quite enjoyed it. I quite liked the exploration around kind of artificial intelligence and consciousness. It played with some themes that I quite enjoyed. I just don't think it went to the level of depth that someone like me would enjoy, because that's what I studied at university. So when it's surface level, I really feel it and I just don't enjoy it. And I think that's what happened. I gave it a 3.5 stars. It wasn't bad by any means, but I wouldn't say it was my favourite. But I am definitely interested to read more by this author. I'll probably read Remains of the Day next, because that's the one I've heard a lot of great things about as well. All right, we've got 2 more books. The next book we have is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. After reading some pretty heavy books and also having some pretty bad experiences in the month of April, I wanted to read something really light, and Abby Jimenez is like one of the few romance authors that I actually enjoy. Unfortunately, that didn't apply to this book. I did not enjoy it at all. I gave it a 2.75 stars. I had pretty high expectations given that I've loved one of her previous books, one of my favourite romance books that I've ever read. But it was just like every other romance book. And I think that's what I loved about her. The one that I really love is that it was like a fresh take on romance, and it felt like the characters were really fleshed out. I just did not get this in this book, and I was very bored as I was reading it, unfortunately. And then that brings me on to the last one, and I will be doing a review of this soon, and that is The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. I have read Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, and I really loved it. So I've been wanting to read more of her sci-fi, and I've had The Lathe of Heaven on my mind for a while now, so I thought I would give it a go, and I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. I think the exploration around how dreams can impact the reality is such an interesting concept. It is quite dense in places, but I really, really enjoyed it. And that's all I'm going to say on this one, because I am going to do a dedicated review on it, and I think it deserves that time. I gave this one a 4.5 stars. Very, very solid, and I'm going to try and read more Ursula K. Le Guin this year. And then that brings me on to what I'm planning to read in the month of May. I'm a mood reader, so I don't plan tons. One book I'm definitely planning to read is Those Above by Daniel Plansky. Is the first book in the Empty Throne duology, and my patrons and I are reading that together. We do many read-alongs together, and we will be reading the first book this month and the second book next month. If you would like to join, feel free to check out my Patreon down below. We have a lot of fun, and so far all of our opinions have aligned really well, which has been quite nice. But it's always a good time. So we'll definitely be reading that at some point in May. And then in terms of other options that I have no idea if I'll actually read these picks, but I'll just kind of list a few. I think I'm going to read Vagabonds by Hao Jingfang, which is, I believe they are a Chinese author, and I've been really getting into kind of like East Asian sci-fi. I think they do sci-fi very well, and so I am very curious about that one, and I've been wanting to get to it for a while. The next one that I'm probably going to read is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. That is for a video that I'm planning. I'm not going to say any more than that. The next one that is potentially an option is Seeds of War by João Silva. This is a self-published author that I've been kind of following for a while, and one, he seems like a lovely guy, and two, I've heard great things about his books, so that is definitely an option. Other options that I have are Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is a book that I've been recommended quite a lot in kind of previous videos in the comments, and so I think it's time to finally pick that up. It's also very short, so always excited to do that. And then I'm sure I'm going to read some Japanese translated fiction as well. There's quite a few ones that I'm interested in. Yoko Ogawa, as an example, has a new book coming out, and I did get approved for an e-arc, so I may pick that up this month. There's a couple of other options too. The Makioka Sisters by Tanizaki is another one that I would really like to read. It is a bit longer, that one though, so I don't know if I'll be able to fit it in, but there's options essentially. So there we have it. Let me know down below what you've been reading. Do you have any favourite picks over the last few months? Have there been any books that you've not enjoyed as well? I always like to hear that. And let me know down below what you're planning to read in the month of May too. Thanks for watching, folks. Please give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you in my next video. Take care. Bye.